Genesis chapter number 6. And toward the end of the class, we're also going to go back through and do kind of a summary of the Old Testament from a covenant standpoint. If I teach some, I've never taught it this way, an Old Testament survey, so it's a little bit of an experiment for me. Normally when I teach through the Bible, I teach through the covenants and/or / dispensations. Those are not identical terms. But most covenants have institute some other dispensation. A dispensation is not a period of time. It's God dispensing something. And the term comes from dispensing God's grace. Yeah.
When you talk about dispensations, do you teach the 7 dispensations? Is that what you're talking about, or is this something different?
No, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, all right, just wondering.
And then there's an 8th out in the kingdom called the dispensation of the fullness of times. But the Bible talks about the dispensation of grace. Right. And when you put it on a chart, it makes people, it leads people often to think that a dispensation is a period of time. And it's not. It's a dispensing. A dispensary dispenses pharmaceuticals. So it's God dispensing His grace. Now, God has dispensed His grace in other ages, but never to the degree as this age. And even then, see, I said an age, because it tends to correspond to a time. He's dispensing something during a period of time. For convenience sake, people call all of them dispensations. You could say He's dispensing the law. And sometimes people call that the legal dispensation because God dispensed the law. I've used that as well, not only because the Bible kind of describes what's going on. It doesn't always give a term. It's kind of like the Trinity. The Bible term is Godhead, but people use Trinity so that it explains without having to. You can use one word to explain a tri-unity, 3 in 1. The word rapture is not in the Bible, but using one word, once everybody knows the definition, is you don't have to say the whole definition every time you talk about it. So, yeah, there's 7 dispensations is what I'm talking about. They tend to correspond with covenants between God and man. For example, what people call the Edenic covenant is the covenant that God made with Adam in the garden. And then you have the Adamic covenant. After man failed, because man always fails, always rebels against God, God sends judgment. And He says, okay, now, in those curses, He sets up a new way for man to have an opportunity to succeed. And He's going to judge men based on His own conscience, which is where we get the idea, always let your conscience be your guide, and Jiminy Cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. I think he met him when he met Jonah in the whale or something. I get those mixed up. And then they're supposed to replenish the earth. And what does man do? He built a tower and says, we're not going to spread out over earth. We don't want to be scattered. So we're going to build us a city and us a tower and all that. So God judges it, divides the languages, starts over with Abram. He says, okay, I'm going to have the Abrahamic covenant, and then Moses, and so on. So they kind of correspond to things that happen in time, but they're not actual time periods. But they tend to correspond with God making a covenant with man and giving him a new opportunity to succeed. If you think about it, under the law, God spelled out everything imaginable. Every feast day, every Sabbath, when you work, how you treat your neighbor, if you steal, what's the penalty? If you loan somebody something, how do you pay them back? Just property boundaries. Most of our laws in the Western world are based on the Bible. And maybe in the rest of the world, I just don't know enough about the rest of the world. But boundaries and courts and all that is based upon things that in the Old Testament. So really you could say, well, if you just, we failed, just spell out every detail and we'll be fine. God spelled out every detail, and what was the law to them? A burden. So you get to today, and God says, all right, you failed when I gave you a perfect environment and all you had to do was not eat one tree. You failed when I let you your conscience be your guide. I'm judging you based on your actions from your own conscience. Your conscience told you were wrong and you did it anyway. Or your conscience told you should do something and you didn't. So you failed that way. And then, human government, all the different things. And so finally God says, all right, I'll just give it to you for free. And what does man do? He wants to work for it. I mean, well, the devil made me do it. Flip Wilson, right? And for those of you over 50. The devil made me do it. So God banishes the devil for 1,000 years. When he comes out, he's got masses willing to follow him, try to overthrow Jesus Christ. In a time where everybody knows who he is. The first time Jesus came, you might have said, well, they knows him. Everybody's going to know him from the least to the greatest. You have 1,000 years of everything put back pretty well, and they're still going to rebel. So in Genesis chapter 6, it says, and it came to pass when man began to multiply upon the face of the earth. So it didn't start right in Moses' day. It was already, Noah's day. If I say Moses, I mean Noah tonight, okay? I don't think Moses is even supposed to come up. I know I have put Moses on the ark in the past. So if I do that, it's Noah. But it didn't happen, it didn't start just at the last minute. It's been going on. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose. Why? Because no one could whoop them. And the Lord said, that's a little New Britain commentary on there. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God, and also after that. In those days, and also after that. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Okay, very famous. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, and it repented the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So Noah was a just man. That's why he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And because he was perfect in his generations. We don't find grace in the eyes of the Lord. Grace finds us. God sends out his grace toward us. We were not just, and so we found grace with God. We were justified after God gave us his grace. All right, so a little different. Perfect in his generations. Remember back in chapter 5, verse 1, it said, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Matthew chapter 1 says the book of the generation, singular, of Jesus Christ. Why? In Matthew, it's talking about his ancestry. It's how he's generated. It's the generation of him. In Genesis 5, it's the generations, the descendants of Adam. So in here, Noah's perfect in his generations. It's not that, oh, he's the only righteous man in his generation, like we use it today, like, the Pepsi generation or the X generation, Generation X or whatever, whatever letter we're on now, Triple Z or whatever. It's his genealogy. His genealogy does not have this corruption in it. So that and the fact that he was a just man allows him not to be destroyed and to be to find grace in the eyes of the Lord. Remember, chapter 3, verse 15 is the first prophecy in the Bible. There might be some in type, but the first stated prophecy. I will put, talking to Satan, God says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. And it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So Lucifer understands this prophecy, and he spends the rest of human history up till Jesus Christ trying to mess up that seed. Now the angels had their own motivation because they looked and said, wow, those women look great. But if he's behind everything, if it was just that one instance, you might think, well, that's all it was. But Satan's always trying to wipe out the seed. He tries to corrupt it. There are times where he tried to corrupt the seed of Israel. There was Pharaoh in Exodus, where Pharaoh tries to have all the male children killed, throw them into the river and all that. Okay, Herod, kill all the children 2 years old and under in Bethlehem, and in the book of Esther, wipe out every Jew on the planet. And there's always wherever that seed is going. In the beginning, Satan doesn't know where that seed's going, but as he hears the promise to Abraham and then to Isaac, then to Jacob, okay, he's following and trying to mess it up. Okay, so the sons of God take wives of the daughters of men. Now people will try to say that the sons of God are the sons of Seth. They're the good people. They're the righteous people. They'll call it the godly line of Seth. And the daughters of men are the daughters of Cain. They're the evil ones. Okay? And what they'll do is, if you go to Matthew 22, I think there's also a verse in Luke or somewhere. I forgot. Mark. I forgot where the other reference is. But in Matthew 22, it basically says the same thing as Matthew 22:30. I can't think of it right now. But in Matthew 22, and we're going to be around Genesis 6 all night, the whole time. Matthew 22:30, the Bible says, Jesus is speaking, and he says, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. And they say, see that? Angels are sexless. Well, it doesn't say sexless. Excuse me, actually every instance in the Bible, angels are male. Are there any female angels? I don't know, but the Bible doesn't talk about them. Okay? And it doesn't say they can't marry or they can't have relations with women. It just says they don't. And then it says the angels of God in heaven. These are not the angels of God, and they're not the angels in heaven. These are angels that rebelled against God, and they're no longer in heaven. They left their first estate, as we'll see. Okay? So, but that's what they'll say. They'll say, see, the angels, they're sexless. And they'll say this mimics the virgin birth. Well, no, it doesn't, because they had natural relations with these women. And number two, Satan always tries to duplicate and imitate what God does anyways. But in the Old Testament, go to Luke chapter 3. In the Old Testament, you only have one person who's called a son of God. Now in Luke 3, you have the genealogy starting in verse 23. The end of the verse says that Joseph, which was the son of Heli. Now, in Matthew, you have the line of the kings, so we have Joseph's father. Since this is a different line, then this would be his father-in-law. If you take the time to look through son in the Bible, a son can be, and we looked at some examples several weeks ago on this, so that's why I'm not doing it again, but a son can be a descendant, like in Matthew chapter 1, Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It can be a grandson, It can be a son-in-law. It can be a son the way we use it. Okay, so so it gives this lineage. But remember, in Matthew, the lineage stopped when it got to a certain point. Why? Because it's showing he's the king. It doesn't go all the way back to Adam. It goes back to Abraham. Okay? Or back to David. Where does Matthew go back to? Abraham. Okay? So showing that he's the king of Israel. This one goes all the way back to verse 38 of Luke 3, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which is the son of Adam, which was the son of God. It's shown his humanity, and as in Adam all die, so it takes his genealogy all the way back to Adam. Well, Adam is the son of God. Why? He was created in man's image. Now, while we're there, we'll go up to John 1, where we just were, in verse 12. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Because of Jesus Christ, we can be a new creature, and so we can be directly created as a son of God. But nobody between Adam and the cross is created. Okay? Nobody is a son of God. Nobody else is called that. So who's called a son of God in the Old Testament? Go to Job chapter 1. Other than speaking of us, son of God or sons of God, well, son of God comes up because there are prophecies to Jesus Christ, but sons of God only comes up in Genesis 6 and in Job. In Job chapter number 1, verse number 6, Job chapter 1, verse number 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And they're clearly not in the earth. Verse 7, Satan had answered where he was coming from going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Job chapter 2, verse 1, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. So these angelic beings, including Satan, who's not an angel, he's a cherub, but he's heavenly being, angelic just as a kind of a summary term for heavenly, come and present themselves before the Lord. Job 38. And some people might say, well, yeah, people were among them. Seems a little far-fetched, but they say, well, Cain was in the presence of the Lord, and Jonah was in the presence of the Lord, so people can come in the presence of the Lord. Okay. So Job 38:7, we looked at this before. Verse 4, where was thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Verse 7, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So these sons of God were already here watching Genesis 1:1 happen. So when you're in the Old Testament, other than Adam, you don't have a son of God, because he lost that image. That's why we saw in Genesis 5, he had a son after his own image, in his own likeness. And the Bible uses those same terms so that you don't miss the connection. Adam was in the image of God and in his likeness. Adam has a son in his image after his own likeness. So in Genesis 6, these are angelic beings. All right. Not only that, turn to Jude. Turn to Jude. In Jude 6, you have, and the angels which kept not their first estate, not the ones that stayed in heaven. What's your estate? It's where you live, right? You die or you can't pay your taxes and they sell your estate. You have a estate sale or whatever. They left there, but left their own habitation where they lived. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, under the judgment of the great day, even as, you'll see a lot of connections between Noah's day and Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, and it's because of this. Even as, so whatever was happening to these angels who left their first estate, the same thing happened again at Sodom and Gomorrah. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner. What were these angels doing that was also being done at Sodom and Gomorrah? Giving themselves over to fornication. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought there was a question. And going after strange flesh. Are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So something was happening with these angels who left their first estate. It's the same thing that was happening at Sodom and Gomorrah. They were committing fornication and going after strange flesh. All right? Go over to 2 Peter. Second Peter chapter 4. Second Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. I make those mistakes so no one thinks I'm flawless, because I know you're tempted to think that. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. So, similar wording to Jude, so you make the connection. Same sentence, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And turning the cities of Sodom, same sentence, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemn them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. So, and the sentence doesn't even end there, but notice again the connection with the angels that sins, Noah, Sodom and Gomorrah, all in the same sentence. And remember, because we're going to refer to it in a few minutes, remember the end of verse 5, the flood was brought upon the world of the ungodly. Okay? Go back to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. Slow me down if I go too fast. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19. Speaking of Christ preaching and stuff, he says, by which, the Spirit in verse 18, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. Now remember, we're not spirits, we're souls. Spirits, cherubim are spirits, God's a spirit, Satan's a spirit, angels are spirits, devils are spirits. We're not spirits. All right? He's preaching to spirits in prison. Which spirits? Verse 20. Which sometime, which is an old way of saying at one time, or in a time in the past, which sometime were disobedient. When were they disobedient? When once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. We'll just say by water, a separate thing, but notice the water. Well, let's look at it. Verse 21, the figure, like whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He in the parentheses, he answers specifically that the water doesn't actually put away the sin, but it's a good conscience. It has to do with a good conscience toward God. But the reason I bring it up, since we're there, is people will say, see, baptism saves you. But being saved by water, if you think about what's going on, the water is what you're being saved from. If you're not saved by the water kills you. So it's not It's worded kind of funny, and God did it that way for a purpose, which is a kind of a separate study. But the parentheses ought to at least say that that doesn't wash away the sin. Okay, that's not what it's talking about. But saved by the water. So what do we have? We have spirits disobedient in the days of Noah. In Genesis 6, we have sons of God disobedient in the days of Noah. They're called angels in 1 Peter 2:4, and they're called angel and for the days of Noah and the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. In Jude, they're called angels of at some point in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're both one's under everlasting chains of darkness and stuff. So these sons of God are angels. Plus, they said the godly line of Seth. Now, if you look, these people lived hundreds of years, and they each had sons and daughters. So Seth had many descendants. It's possible there were about 10 million people on the earth easily by the time Noah's flood comes. And if you just give them half and half, say 5 million are from Seth, all right? And if the numbers could be 1 million, could be 20 million, but kind of a conservative number if you multiply it out in different things. Yeah, 10 million, but let's say it's 100,000. They all had sons and daughters, sons and daughters, sons and daughters. So Noah has lots of aunts and uncles, cousins, sisters, brothers. They all drowned. They're all from the godly line of Seth. So if the sons of God here are the male descendants of Seth, why did they drown? The Bible says they brought in the flood on the world of the ungodly. So if they drowned, they were ungodly. So they're not the godly line of Seth. They're the ungodly line of Seth and the ungodly line of Cain and anybody else that maybe any other sons they had that they didn't mention. You know, it wasn't like they only had 2 sons, or 3 sons. But Cain, Abel, and Seth are the only ones we have named. But they're all ungodly and they all drown. So the godly line of Seth, you end up with one person, that doesn't work. And then we just looked at all the different scriptures. And last time I checked, if a righteous man marries an unrighteous woman, their children are not giants. And people will say, well, they're not really giants in a physical sense. They're giants in the sense that they're famous. Well, they were famous. They were men of renown. But if they're men of renown and they're famous, and it happened before and after the flood, it seems like you would see them in the histories of the world. And you do. I mean, it may not be accurate renditions, but what do you see? Zeus, Apollo, Hercules, all the boys, Thor, Mercury, Jupiter, all those guys. They were the famous men of renown. They were real. Now, is everything that's written about them real? Everything in our history book's not real. But in general, that they were there. Every culture in the world has them. Those were the men of renown of yesteryear. And they were mighty men of old. They were men of renown. And in fact, even who are the movies and legends? Some of them probably are legends, but a lot of times that legend is kind of thrown around a little bit. What historians do is they look and they find these writings, and a lot of it seems to be accurate history about kings and wars and treaties and businesses and inventions. And in the midst of this, you have all these Hercules and these guys. And they say, oh, these people were superstitious. Here's their history. And they artificially sort out what they say is legend. But the people who wrote it didn't write it as legend. I mean, there might have been a few. They wrote stories like we did, Homer's Odyssey and stuff. But the things they wrote down as history contained all these people in it. It's just modern scholars scoff at that, and it doesn't fit their template of the world, their view of the world, so they take that out and say this is legend and myth and all that. Some of it may be, you have exaggerations just like in everything, but the basis thing, they're there. And also after that, right? Also after that. The Moabites, by the way, and I mention them because the Bible mentions that what they called some of these guys, as we'll see. The Moabites worshipped a couple of these groups and said they were over 10 feet tall. Psalm, Holy Finger in Genesis 6, obviously, go to Psalm 82. In Psalm 82, verse 1, a psalm of Asaph. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty, he judgeth among the gods. And these gods were in position of judgment. It says, how long will ye judge unjustly, and accept the persons of the wicked? Selah. Selah is always a clue too, because whenever you see the word Selah, which means rock, it's the same word as Petra. Within 3 verses of that, one way or another, will be prophecy of the second coming, or the tribulation. So even though he's talking about something that happened long before, something that he's talking about is going to be repeated up in the tribulation time. Verse 6, I have said ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men. You know, if they keep their first estate, they're essentially immortal. Right? They come down and they can take on human form. And they will die like men. And you'll have people say, well, in the Hebrew, gods means judges. These were Israeli judges. Well, in the New Testament, Jesus quotes the verse. And in Hebrew, judges and gods are very similar. The words, you could kind of argue it. Number one, I have a King James Bible. I don't care. But to show their hypocrisy, Jesus quotes this verse in the book of John. And in Greek, it's just as clear as it is in English. It's not the same word. How come they don't point that out? They're always going to the Greek. How come they don't want to go to Greek now? Because it doesn't match what they want to say. So anytime people are going, you can mark it down. When everyone goes to Greek or Hebrew, other than just to kind of point out what someone else does, either they've just been taught that way and they don't know any better, and they're just mimicking what they're taught, or the Bible doesn't what they want it to say, so they're going to use it to change it to make it say what they want it to say. Okay, so your Bible's always right. And you don't have to worry about that. But once in a while, I do point it out just because to see that they're duplicitous. You know, they're not being honest with you when they do that. Okay. So these sons of God take them, and the result is there are giants. And it says, and also after that. And so what happens after that? Go to Genesis 14. Genesis 14, verse 1, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar. That's Hammurabi. If you've ever heard of Hammurabi, that's him. Okay? All these guys are identified in history. It's just they come from different lands. Depends on, you know, different, just like today, sometimes they have different names in different countries. But these guys are not unknown to history. It's funny, people always want to talk about the Babylonian tablets to say that's superior to the Bible and all that stuff. Those tablets have these guys in it and matches the time and all that, you know. But anyways, Amraphel, king of Shinar, that's Hammurabi. Arioch, king of Elasar. Elasar, that's the elven name for Aragorn, right? Never mind, sorry. Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. Okay, so Bela sometimes is called Zoar. All these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. So remember, Moses is writing about this 500 years later. So at the time that this is happening, it's a valley. It's a very lush valley. This is why Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan is well watered, and he journeyed toward this very lush valley. But by the time Moses is writing about it, the current present tense is, which is the Salt Sea. So after God ruins Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns, the place gets turned into the Dead Sea and gradually fills up. And now you wonder why there's so trillions of dollars of minerals in there. So it's the Salt Sea by the time Moses writes. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. So that's the first time 13 is used in your Bible. And in the 13th year is usually when people rebel, right? Something about that age, right? It's a coincidence. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims, giants. In Ashtaroth Karnaim, Ashtaroth is like Easter and Semiramis and Diana. It's the goddess of fertility. So the Rephaims were in this town that's named after her. And the Zuzims, giants. Sometimes the Zuzims are called Zamzumims. I love those names. In Ham. And the Emims, giants. Anytime you see these Ems instead of the ites, I don't know if there's an exception or not. I haven't found one. I've been looking. They're groups of giants. And they're in history too. And oddly enough, everybody talks about, oh, secular history doesn't back up the Bible. Whenever you find these guys, it says just what the Bible says about them. And they're just like, I can't be that big, you know. And then you have some other groups, Horites and so on. But the Zuzims, Emims, and Rephaims are here. And how did they get there? And also after that. And what's going on? All these going after strange flesh, committing fornication, God wipes them out. If you follow Israel's history, you know, there were some countries where God said, you can let them live if they'll give in. And there's other ones that says, kill them all. You know, women, children, young, old, babies, goats, cows, cats, dogs, you know, parakeets, you know, just wipe them all out. Why? You follow through their histories, and the ones messing with these angels or descendants from them are the ones God says wipe them out. Because Satan's always trying to corrupt the seed. All right? Remember in Genesis 6 what it said, all flesh had corrupted itself upon the earth. All right? Hold your finger there and go to Isaiah 14. Now, I wasn't even going to go here, but since we're talking about all flesh corrupting itself, we'll look at one verse. This verse, I don't know about some parts of the world, but for America and Europe in the 20th and so far the 21st century, if you want a verse to show someone if they'll actually believe what the Bible says, no matter what it says, you take them to this verse. There's one other like it in Isaiah 14, I think it's verse 20 or 21. But it says, all flesh corrupted itself, and God wiped out everything that breathed air. He didn't wipe out the fish and stuff, but anything that breathed air, God destroyed. Because all flesh had corrupted itself upon the earth. What are they doing nowadays? Remember the days the tribulation was supposed to be like these days? You know, back in the 90s, they grew some ear out of the back of a mouse, you know. And it was just cartilage, wasn't a functional ear, but, you know, fed it. Gave it human growth hormone. The mouse was this big, right? In Isaiah 14, you can turn to chapter 34, because Isaiah 14 has nothing to do with I went, I don't know what I told you, I went to 14 because of the parallel verse, but. In Isaiah 34, verse 14, it says, the wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The satyr is a half man, half goat. Now, you can say it's a human blending that the angels did, or because normally that's not possible. You know, were they doing genetic experiments and stuff? I don't know. You know, now I'm getting off a little Twilight Zone-ish, but I remember taking microbiology, and every virus is a strand of DNA or RNA. It's actually not an organism. And I thought, I wonder if that was some of the results of some of these experiments these guys were doing. Remember, what was forbidden? All the things that are in the law that are forbidden, the Bible says are things that they saw done in Egypt. And sodomy was one of them, and what was right after it? Bestiality. The angels are a lot smarter than we are, a lot more knowledgeable. Say, that couldn't be. Really? We put pigs' hearts in people and, you know, experiment trying to give blood transfusions from seahorses, right, to people. And, you know, you make insulin out of sheep stuff. I mean, you know, who knows, you know. But it could be a satanic, like demonic creature too. But it's a half goat, half man. The only other, if you look at an old dictionary, that's the only definition there is. If you look at a new one, you can find an ape. But the ape was only discovered in the 1950s, and they named it after this because he was so promiscuous. And the satyrs in history and legend, all that, was supposed to be very promiscuous. So back to, so you're going to take it literally or not? Says it was a satyr. So back in Genesis 14, you have what we had. Now go to Numbers 13. We'll just look at a couple more verses quickly about them before we close. Numbers chapter 13. Just so there's no doubt that they're not just giant in the sense that, you know, Ray Kroc was a giant in the restaurant world or whatever. But actual physical giants. Numbers 13, verse 33. They sent the spies into the land. And it says, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. So these are giants that were descendant of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in theirs. Deuteronomy 2. We won't take the time, but I think it's up in Amos. They got giants there for height as cedar trees. I mean, Goliath be a little giant, 9'9", you know. But he's much more, you know, it's been weeded out of him later on down the road, you know. He's not even half, you know. Deuteronomy 2, verse 11. Verse 10. And the Emims dwelt therein in time past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims. So you don't have to, this is a good example, you don't have to look it up in Hebrew to figure out that Emim is a giant. The Bible will tell you it. Okay? So the Emims were great as the Anakims, which were also accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites called them Emims. So God's going to a couple times mention what the Moabites call them. And I don't know if God did that just because he knows in history that's what's going to survive is their accounts. Not that their account is the word of God, but you know, sometimes God doesn't need outside proof for his word, but sometimes he gives it to us, you know. Just like Pilate, you know, they said Pilate, there was no record that Pilate ever existed until, you know, not that long back. Somebody flipped over a sidewalk stone, and there it was, you know, Pilate, prelate of Judea, whatever, and figured out it was AD 37 or whatever, something like that, I forget. But basically, you know, that was a criticism. This guy never existed. Well, oops, yes he does. God didn't have to do that. And we had the Bible, we didn't have to have that, but, you know, God allows us to have those things sometimes. So maybe that's why he keeps mentioning what the Moabites call them. I don't know. Verse 20. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Amorites called them Zamzummims. Okay? Chapter 3, verse 11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof. So it would be, if it's an 18-inch cubit, that's 13.5 feet. And 4 cubits the breadth of it, 6 feet, after the cubit of a man. And this land, verse 13, and the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, gave I unto the half tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argob, with all the Bashan, which was called the land of the giants. Basically, there's a couple areas, but there's a valley of giants, the land of the giants. The land of the giants over there in Jordan, in that area. One more, Joshua 12. But it's funny, every time someone's going to have any major player is going to take over the world with Cain, he has to face one of these guys. Adam faced Satan. Noah faced the sons of God. Abraham runs into him and has to fight him. David has to fight Goliath. And they're going to be around. He's going to fight the Antichrist when he takes over. Joshua chapter 12, verse 4. And the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth and at Edrei. Notice the association with the city of Ashtaroth. Why would they name it after her? She was a great goddess of theirs, if she really exists, which throughout history she does. So, any questions on that? Interesting stuff. All right, so we'll get into the post-flood era after this.